All right, welcome everyone. We're excited to have you. I'm excited to have the hot seat here in control of all the things. You'll notice on WhatsApp, I'm also an admin now. Have been restricting myself, sending silly things. Amy, thanks for the video earlier this week. You know, I think it's a really interesting space we're in as a world. Obviously, these are long-standing issues across the globe, but it's interesting that, you know, the combination of the stress of COVID and people kind of just having enough and saying, we're going to stand in solidarity and we're going to stand against these things. So some interesting stuff, also the video that you posted on the surface, and I look forward to hearing, you know, your discussion. And again, like you mentioned, having more of a dialogue as opposed to a monologue. So we're looking forward to that, guys. For those of you who don't really know, Amy is an agricultural specialist. She's currently in Portugal doing her PhD. I'm not sure on what exactly. Clearly, she's apparently a surfer, and Vincent tells me an Afrobeat enthusiast. So yeah, we look forward to hearing from you. But before we get on the serious stuff, Martin, I hope the child has been dropped off. Is that a nod? Can we hand over to you for some gratitude?
Cool. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's Martin. Today, I've been given a task to actually run with gratitude. I'd like to go back to the fact that I'm very happy and very fortunate and very glad that we are in this space where we have been affected by a pandemic and none of us have actually contracted it. We've been given the chance to hit a reset button in our lives, not only on the professional side of things, but also on the social side of things. Some of us have been granted opportunities to spend more time with our families, to see our sons and daughters and kids and our wives more often. And that on its own has gone the tremendous strides in just strengthening bonds and relationships within their homes. I do understand out there's probably an outcry or an increase in people who've gone with probably home violence and all that stuff, but we are fortunate enough to have not been part of that. And that I take and I count as a blessing for myself. And I think everyone else here would be very much happy to know that you're not counted as the statistics of COVID, one, as the actual virus, and two, as a social victim of whatever sort. So I'd just like to pass that on. But also and above that, in our island, I think we've been very much lucky enough that for a small island, so we shut down the borders and everything was fine. We have now gone for 21 days without the virus. No new viruses, no active cases, nothing whatsoever. And wow. As a result, next week, Monday, they are actually removing social distancing rules. So this whole 2 meter away from people and all the stuff that's gone from Monday next week. So we can have our friends over, we can hug people, we can actually go back to some sort of normality in our island. And I'm very helpful and I'm very glad and thankful for such things. We can't take them for granted because they're not given, they have been earned. A lot of people have had to sacrifice meeting other people and making friends and all that stuff. So I'm quite grateful. And one last thing before I move over, what I am going to try and do is share with you guys the actual island. So I'll put on your mute because it's quite windy. I don't want you to have like feedback, but I'll give you a little view of that.
Martin, where are you? I'm sorry, I don't know where you're at.
He's in Isle of Man in the UK.
Okay, cool.
Beautiful, isn't it? Stunning. Oh my, but why is it traffic? Eh?
He's muted, remember? Just give him a chance.
Thank you so much, guys. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a view of where I stay.
Very nice.
in Xhosa, Martin, we say what you just did, other than, showing us the nice things as Kaisel.
Wow.
Thank you for the gratitude. And yeah, it's great that you're in that space, and it gives us something to look forward to as well. And thanks for sharing, your positive energy around where you are and looking forward to great things, and like legitimately dropping your son off at places as of Monday. Amy, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you. And then guys, throughout the chat, feel free to pop things there. I'll manage them to ensure that, we have a solid conversation afterwards. There's a lot of people here with no videos, muted. So we're just going to hope that they join us at some point, and we have a fruitful discussion. So Amy, over to you.
Cheers. Thanks, Charlene. So as I said in that little video, I'm much more keen to have a dialogue rather than just a presentation. And it's really because the question that's been on my mind about these dynamics of the two different types of protests that I came across and have been thinking about for the last several days. That's exactly what they are. They're just questions, and I don't have answers to them. And they're things that I think bear discussion. So, as I mentioned in the video, on Saturday, I participated in a march here in Lisbon. And in the interest in full disclosure, I think this is only the third protest march I've ever participated in my life. The last one prior to this would have been after Trump was elected in the States. And in the interest of fuller disclosure, I have no shame about my politics. I am not a Trump fan at all. And I feel quite strongly that what's happening in the States right now on many, many levels is going quite sideways. But in any case, here in Portugal, I was quite surprised and very pleased to see that there was a protest movement building on social media, catalyzed much as it was in a lot of other places in the world by the death of George Floyd, who I'm certain all of you must know at this point, but is an American man who happened to be Black, and he was accosted by the police, as far as I understand, for potentially passing a bad check. He was writing a bad check at a convenience store. And then when the cops came to arrest him, one of the cops very blatantly kneeled on the poor man's neck for almost 9 minutes. And, I think it's just, all it is a snapshot that somebody happened to catch on camera about something I think that happens all the time in the States, in cities all over the place. And it's not just exclusive to the States. I think it happens in a lot of places. In any case, on Saturday, I participated in this march here. And I wasn't sure how many people were going to show up. And when I arrived at the location where the organizers had designated all of us to start, I was thrilled and actually pretty humbled to see that there were thousands and thousands of people. I think the news coverage estimated here in Lisbon, it was about 5,000 to 6,000 marchers. And there were simultaneous marches that happened here in Lisbon, as well as in Coimbra and Porto, which are the other two major cities in Portugal. So it was just a really, I don't know, kind of an incredible, certainly an incredible emotional experience, I guess, for me as an individual, but more importantly and intentionally, it was, I think, a very powerful collective experience of people coming together around a shared set of values and a sense of justice where it's being served and where it's not. And we marched, from a major metro station in the heart of Lisbon, down a massive thoroughfare. They closed all of the traffic, and we marched through, I think, some of Lisbon's most diverse neighborhoods. One of the neighborhoods is like the heart of a lot of immigration, or a lot of immigrants in Lisbon. And it was, I think, a really powerful is a very good word, but it was a pretty significant experience of protest or demonstration of protest. And that night when I got home, I happened to receive a message from as I said, from a friend in Southern California, which is my home of origin, about a gathering. They weren't even calling it a protest, I don't think. They were just calling it a gathering, a show of solidarity in a suburb of San Diego. And as I said, the suburb happens to be kind of like an upper middle class, largely white suburb, a lot of surfers. As Vincent and Charlene said, I am a surfer and have been for a very long time. And so I've got a lot of connections to that sort of community and culture. But the protest itself, when I was reading the coverage of it, I have to admit that my gut level reaction was one of a bit of cynicism about the intention behind it, the impact behind it, and sort of the meaning of who was participating in it. And I think I watched the video and listened to what Sal Masekela had to say. He's part of that surf community tangentially. I think he was a commentator within one of the major surf competition organizations, and I don't think he was ever a pro surfer. He is a surfer, and he used to live in that particular community and still has ties to it. So he's clearly representative of a voice within that community, but definitely a minority voice within that community, which I would say is probably 80-90% is white. But for me, the thing I think that stuck in my gut more than anything else was this thing about everybody paddling out. This is a tradition in the surf community or in surf culture. Usually it's when somebody dies that, friends and family, surfers from the community will gather together. Everybody will paddle out at once, sort of form a big circle. And it's just a gesture of memorialization of somebody when they die. And so that's what they did for George Floyd, and formed this circle of unity and a show of solidarity for the Black Lives Matter movement. But the cynical side of me asked myself, well, what does that actually do? And I really thought about the contrast between those two protest gatherings or gatherings of solidarity, and one which took a body of people, quite a massive body of people, through a commercial district, through a heart of a major city, engaged directly with the police, which was very peaceful and there wasn't any conflict, but intentionally interacted with really diverse, ethnically diverse and immigrant neighborhoods, had one particular audience and perhaps a different intention and definitely a different energy. And then this other gathering, which I think had a very different tenor to it. And so I don't necessarily want to skew the discussion, but my perspective, which I'm just going to put out there for anybody to respond to however they like, but my perspective was, well, is it doing anything for a bunch of white surfers to paddle out into the ocean and say they're showing solidarity for the death of a Black American man? There is no police conflict or police violence happening in the middle of the surf. That particular community itself is an incredibly safe, very middle class, suburb. And there was actually a huge protest held downtown in San Diego, in the center of the city, for which thousands of people showed up and was a significant protest movement. And I think there was a conscious choice that would have been made by the folks in this community not to go join that particular protest. They must have made a decision around it, and rather to stay in their own community, to protest on the beach or gather on the beach, and to do something that felt, probably very comfortable and very feel good, and so I've just been sitting with those questions for the last few days. I've bounced them off of a couple of different friends and I've gotten a lot of different responses. And, I'm definitely playing the devil's advocate here. I think amongst the people in the surf community that I've asked, they're sort of siding more with those folks in San Diego. And I'm saying, yeah, but to what end? To what end is paddling out into the ocean generating any kind of change for social justice? And so those are the kinds of things I kind of just wanted to throw out there for discussion. When we think about any kind of protest at all, regardless of what the issue at hand is, what does it matter what the intention of the protest is, or the intention of the organizers? What's the impact that we should really be looking for? Should it just be solidarity? Is there enough value in that when the issue really is something that needs tangible change? Is solidarity enough? Is that kind of a protest where people are just getting together and it feels good? Is that just like the in-person version of thoughts and prayers, you know, throwing thoughts and prayers out and for those of you who have a spiritual tradition, please don't think that that I'm negating the power or the import of prayer at all, but rather to say that in a space where real change needs to happen and people need to make that change happen, is gathering only for the sake of solidarity in a very sort of safe and honestly segregated space. Is that actually doing anything? And yeah, you know, who should be the intended audiences? Who should be the people participating? And I'm just curious. I'm also kind of curious to know. I assume, I don't think anybody else in the group is a surfer, although certainly I have no idea if that's the case. But I'm very curious to know what people outside that community, because it's pretty insulated and it's a very white community, even in South Africa. I think, you know, the professional surfers in South Africa, there's only a couple of them who are not white. And historically, surfing in general worldwide has been a really segregated professional sport. And so I think particularly in that context, when I read that Zigzag article, like a day or two later, and the guy writing it, you know, was really, oh, it's such a shame that South African surfers couldn't do this. And I also thought to myself, yeah, but is it a shame though? Should there be some other type of protest or demonstration, you know, happening for the folks, the South Africans who died at the hands of police during the quarantine? I don't know. So that's it. It was kind of a monologue. I probably did just talk for like 5 to 10 minutes. Sorry. Now I really will stop and just throw it on the table. I'm open to whatever anybody's thoughts are. Curious if anybody else has ever participated in any kind of social protest and what that experience was like, and if anybody's got any background in community organization or, you know, demonstration, that kind of thing, and just yeah, curious what everyone's perspective is.
Thanks, Amy, for that. And, you know, for posing the question and, you know, really asking, like Mbali's saying here, to what end, you know, what is the impact and who are we doing it for? And I think what's interesting about your reflection is twofold. So one, you went to both, but two, you left wondering, you know, was that enough? And I think that's got to do largely with what our own expectations are when we go into a space, you know, our own ideas and ideologies of what more can come of this. And sometimes you go into a space invited by someone else or created by someone else and feel like it's not enough because your own desires are for more. And that's really what I'm hearing you probe here, is around what is that impact. And I think that impact for me anyway is always different and cross-cutting, and is to start conversations like this. You know, perhaps surfers would have paddled out for one of their own, but they may not have paddled out for an African American on the other side of the world. And here we're having a conversation about how a group of people who were never connected or reflected on such issues before are now starting to, in their own spaces, internalize and perhaps try a little bit to understand what it might feel like to be Black in a space and not belong. And perhaps the impact in that setting was to just do that, and that is enough. So guys, let's have the conversation that Amy's looking for. Let's unpack this a bit. You know, let's address the question that she says. I think you said, is this a feel good? And if so, for whom? Is the solidarity enough? I see here Mbali mentioned, Amy, I'm glad you asked the question, to what end? Because I find these marches take place, there's media coverage takes place, and a couple of days later, life goes on as if was no constitution or laws are changed.
So, hi, hello everyone.
Hi, Molly.
Hear me? Hi. So I've participated in one march, and that was against femicide, gender-based violence. And to this day, like I feel like I added great steps to my walk for the day, but nothing changed. You know, we still have the whole women abuse still taking place. And I think my concern is that perhaps, I don't know, you know, obviously America is different to how the South African government operates and whatever. But I just feel like in South Africa, we march and we've marched. No government actually goes back to say, hold on, you know, even if it's like 5,000 or 5 people, they marched against a certain cause. How can we then, you know, either change the law or something? I just feel like, shame, us, the public, are the ones that are concerned and the authorities aren't. That is, I think, my sort of trying to understand the value of marches. Personally, I just think I don't get it, even though, like I say, I have done one and I was just like, okay, nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely can identify with that feeling. And, you know, part of me wonders if, particularly in such a media-focused society, and, you know, if these kinds of marches, if they're not supported by a really strong infrastructure of community organization and exactly that, very targeted folks who have the skills, the capacity, or the connections, or all three, to actually make changes in legislation or, you know, lobby for reform. And if that infrastructure is not there, then I wonder if these kinds of marches are just like, it's just an in-person step up from social media engagement. You know, everybody feels like they can sign a petition online, they can post some things on their Facebook, and that's like level 1. You go to level 2 and maybe you show up in person and you march in the street, and you know, maybe you show your sign on the nightly news, and maybe that's where it stops. And I actually don't know. I mean, I think for me here in Lisbon, I'm not sure. The government here also works very differently even than in the States or in South Africa. I know in the States right now, for example, I think the prolonged protests are having the effect that individual states are, some of them, not very many, but some of them, are making decisions about implementing reforms, legislative reforms for how police departments and police unions can operate. You know, like I know at least a couple states have made decisions about outlawing, I forget, they have a technical term for it, but like a headlock, you know, when you put somebody like in a chokehold, they're outlawing that as a tactic, you know, and making some other changes about the things that the police are allowed to do. But there's a lot of resistance to that, and it's a very small number of states that are actually implementing that. I do know that the city of Minneapolis, which is the city where George Floyd was killed, that they are dismantling their police force and starting from scratch. And that has happened, I think, in only maybe 1 or 2 other cities in the past, where corruption and you know, police brutality and racism was so deeply entrenched that the feeling was it would never ever be able to be reformed. It needed to be deconstructed and rebuilt from the ground up. And there has been, I think, 1 or 2 case studies in the States, and I will I'm going to make a note for myself to try to find the article that was shared with me by a friend about the history behind that. But I think that's another compelling question, right? Like, in some cases, are reforms even possible? Or if there's going to be change, you know, is it sort of like a more revolutionary tactic where we say, all right, well, we just have to tear it down and start from the beginning?
Right. Can I go on?
Sarah's muted there. Go ahead, Vince, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. Right, yeah, thanks, Amy, for that. The reason why I think I'm a fan of these talks is that, you know, we take a very, I'd say, common subject at face value, and when it gets into the platform, it turns out to be not what you would expect out of it, and that for me is absolutely interesting, because you can never tell from an intro video or from the title actually what it is that's going to be discussed until you get involved in the discussion itself. So yeah, thank you for that fresh perspective in terms of having to question the impact of all of those, I'd say, protest actions, or rather gatherings, or whatever that they might call it. But I've got a view, and to probably connect to what Bali was saying, and since again, you know, the interest at any one time that we're having discussions is to try and pull our minds forward, as opposed to just debating about what is happening. But I would like to throw in this view, and the view is that, you know, there's a serious delusion between what people think is happening versus what actually happens, or what is happening. And there's a lack of acknowledgement, either by deliberate intention just to validate what it is that they are putting effort to. There's lack of acknowledgement and lack of, I'd say, keenness to accept reality for what it is. And I'll make an example about something that I think is common to all of us in the world. Everybody knows about the South African history in terms of South Africa being locked in an apartheid system for well over 5 decades. If you go around the streets and you hear the stories and you hear the sociological narrative that is propagated through our education system, there's a serious highlight of protest actions, which therefore led to the emancipation of South Africans in totality, right? So if you go to anyone on the street, any kid, you'd say, oh, how did apartheid end? Oh, no, we marched. You know, we had, 1956, at Sharpeville, we had 1976, the protests against the use of Afrikaans as a language. Oh no, we burnt this and we destructed that, and therefore, yes, we were liberated in 1990. Mandela was released because we striked, and so on and so forth. So my take on this is that there's that narrative, which is a surface narrative that everybody seems to enjoy telling, and it's actually not the truth. The reality is, if you go back and connect the dots of what really brought this freedom that we call today South Africa, where everyone was allowed to vote, is that there were institutions of power that needed to make those changes in order for everyone who is a South African citizen to have the right to vote. It had nothing to do with protests. It had nothing to do with people burning stuff and killing each other, etc., etc. I can obviously go to the detail of what is it that is the 1 level or 2 level below what the surface belief is. But the truth is, the apartheid government, or the National Party, so to speak, to really not be biased, the National Party only went to the negotiation table because they felt they were ready to do so. They didn't go to the negotiation table because people were dying or people were protesting, right? Mandela was not released because people were protesting and burning stuff. Mandela was released for a very strategic reason, and was to negotiate the transfer of power. There are a lot of other things which surround that whole narrative, which makes me believe that really the delusion is more of having to ascribe value to the actions that we take, as opposed to really understanding that our actions link to a real change. So coming back to the topic at hand, is that I've been saying to friends, and I mean, I asked Wise not so long ago, and I asked Martin not so long ago, and I asked people around me to say, please give me some understanding of what really is going on here. I'm failing to grasp the momentum and the energy behind all of these protests. And obviously Martin gave me the detail, and I went and scratched a little bit further into it, and I found that really, this man died with absolute brutality, and nobody, it's incomprehensible to actually, figure, how these things happen today in 2020. But obviously, it happened what happened, and I'm deeply remorseful for what this guy went through. But what I cannot understand for the life of me is what ensues after the death of this guy. So clearly there's a disconnect there. The protests and the rolling out of mass actions outside just the death of a guy. And I know perhaps it's a systematic issue larger than what I am able to see, but I'm hoping that, coming out of this call, I have a better insight. But certainly for me, there's a disconnect between what the action is versus what actually happened. And the desired outcome seems to be, again, disconnected from the action that has been taken. So the surface for me is probably, one of those things. I mean, people acting in solidarity and so on and so forth. But really coming to the crux of it, are we honestly in our minds believing that by us having to jump and down all day, we can bring meaningful change to structural issues that require institutional participation?
So on any other given day, anyone who said what Vincent would have said, I would have completely shut down. In fact, I confess I did look for a mute button. But I felt, approach it with love, like we discussed last week. These are working progresses. And I've made a note here, friend, for us to discuss this in more detail one-on-one. So it will become a project. But for the purposes of this call, just one thing that I would
I'm glad I invited you.
Yeah, just one thing, just one that I would like to address, and it speaks to what Unotanda wrote here. The political is personal. Us standing together in solidarity and showing up for each other is enough for each other, because we don't all sit in spaces of power where what you can say can defy the patriarchy, can attack racism, or make political change, or make big moves. So the little bit you can do, which is in this instance, pedal out or show up, is enough to play your part within your space to ignite those that can. I'm going to give Martin an opportunity, because you and I, Nje, will have a one-on-one on this one.
Cool. Thanks for that. I think I've been quite listening diligently from you guys, and I take on board all the points that have been made. I too was part of a march this Tuesday past in Alomen, where we're an island of 85,000 people in total, which is a very small island. We had a turnout of roughly 1,500 people, or just over 1,500 people. And I would say the Black community is maybe 8% of the island, if even. There's literally hardly any Black people here. But obviously during or leading up to the march, this is where you started seeing people who I deem and call keyboard warriors, people who are raising all their racist comments and all that stuff. And then that's where you realize, oh wait, there's actually some people who are closet racist, right? But over and above that, what I did notice during the march itself is there's a lot of people who came out in support and said, we are not those people, versus the people who were on the social medias talking this and that. So in retrospect, these marches, more than anything, are a show of solidarity, a show of do not believe all the stuff you see in social media. We are actually here physically. We are here with you. I can hold your hand. I'm a real person. I'm not a person over a screen. I'm not a person anywhere else virtually. I'm right here with you. I see you, brother. I see you, sister. Let's fight this together. And I do agree in the sense that although these marches don't directly, most of them have a link to the higher powers or powers that be at the time, they speak directly to the person who is affected or going through that situation at that point in time. So it's like, if you think about it this way, if something happened in terms of like a family member or a friend passes away, the people who are right there, even though they can never bring back the person who's passed away to life, are the people you need the most, because they're right there holding you and saying, whatever you need from me, even if it's a shoulder to cry on. And this is how I view the surfers. They're saying, we don't know how to do this thing. We can't be in the streets. We can't. But what can we do? We can be in. This is what we know. This is our language within our community that will resonate more than just walking down the streets. Clearly, in that community, people have seen the protests and probably have decided these are either too violent, they don't represent what I represent. How can I better represent myself? So they've gone and said, okay, let's do surfing. And I feel like the surfing part of it, more than anything, would also actually reach more people that are in that community. And then, like you were saying, there's a very minority of Black people in the surfing community. Those people now will feel at least they're being represented in their love for the sport. So you touching them, I mean, I think every time there's a crisis, we almost always lean towards music. There's that world song. There's when there was like huge crises and stuff. There's all the artists that came together. They made the world song and all that stuff. And even in South Africa, we got like united by sports. You know what I mean? All these things, as human beings, we are keen to find something that's a commonality between us. And those surfers, all they did was they found something that's common that they can hold each other together and say, "We see you, brother." So I agree with both sets of marches. And then before I let go and give other people a chance, I just want to clear out a few things. Like there's a few, obviously, I do not by any means promote the violence that's happening within this protest, but there's a lot of people thinking, I need to dictate how you're going to protest. And I think if I am the person who is being shown injustice to, and the person who's showing me injustice is still telling me this is how you complain to me, it's just not going to work. You cannot, and also like this has been systematically going on for years and years. I mean, Malcolm X was a very like action-based leader. They shot him. Martin Luther King was more of a peaceful protester. They shot him. Like, sorry, which one do you want? Do you want us to go to peaceful, where it doesn't affect your businesses, but we still protest and nothing happens? Or do you want us to go to violence and then something actually happens to your businesses, but you're still gonna kill us? So I'm at that point where I'm like, this is just, I don't promote the violence, but I also understand why people are going all crazy about it. Because if you're a parent raising up a kid, if he screams "mom" in a nice tone and voice, and you ignore him, he'll go to the next level of the voice, the next level of the voice, and you are slowly but surely teaching him, if you speak to me, you need to scream at me. The next time he speaks to you, he will immediately start off, "mommy," and then you're like, oh, okay, cool. You have taught your child to scream at you just by ignoring him from the initial set where he was talking nicely to you. Same thing with his protests. If you go start off peacefully marching and they ignore you, nothing happens. Like you're saying, in South Africa, this is probably going to happen at some point in time. All these marches that are happening that are peaceful and don't do anything, and people are going to be fed up. Like nothing ever happens out of this. What's next going to happen? People are going to be violent. People are going to, because we demand the change that we need. And that's where I rest my case.
Wise, I think you had a hand. Yes? Yeah. I can't hear you. Can anyone else hear him? I can see your lips moving, but I can't hear you. I can't hear you even now. Don't be sad. While Wise tries to sort himself out.
Hello.
There we go.
Oh, there we go.
All right. Yeah. Hi, everyone. What a discussion, you know, and I think the discussion is actually even much bigger than the surfers that did the surfing in solidarity. I think it's you know, Vincent, I think you need to do more research on that item.
We'll work on him. Don't worry about
it. Because yes, maybe one we probably I'm not sure, but I haven't seen anything being done here in South Africa. But definitely, I believe that if there was something, I would have joined it. It's not it's not a way of taking this personally, but it's also with the understanding, as Martin has said, it's the understanding of the oppression that's created by these systems. And if you can actually participate in a movement for change, why not, you know? And on the field that I'm in, I think, Vincent, I have actually shared a few incidents with you on the project side of things, you know, whereby, whether good or bad, but people actually protest to enforce changes in a lot of things. And I can say that protests do work, you know, whether negatively or positively, but they will make you listen to whatever it is that the guys are the message that's being portrayed at the time. You know, that's for your sake, Vincent. Just know that these things do work. They do make people listen. It's not that things change only because someone has decided that, okay, now I've had enough, then I can actually make the change. No, changes do happen forcefully. And the change that has happened at the Minneapolis Police Department was a forced change. If what had happened had not happened, that change would have not been there, you know. That goes as far as the upgrading of the charges being laid to the perpetrators. If people were not protesting and raising their voices and their dissatisfaction, those charges would have not been upgraded, you know. So in terms of what's a good and a bad way to protest, well, unfortunately, there is no formula, you know, for those things. But protests do make a difference. And then at the same time, do we welcome protests from white minorities in instances of this? Definitely, you know. And I think these things, even by seeing what's happening on the social media, I'm not sure if it's something that's just psychological. You would at times find yourself in spaces whereby you sort of speculate racist reactions, be it maybe on the road, or be it to interact with people in, say, maybe shopping centers or so forth, you know. But seeing these sort of forces around the world, I do believe that we are also likely to see psychological changes, you know, throughout the people who are actually racist, to start accepting people as their equals, if one may actually put it that way. So that's it.
Thanks, Wise, for that. Amy, I'm going to bounce back to you here, just, you know, as our, what was it, leader?
That was from a completely unrelated Zoom meeting where I was the leader.
You know, and I want to provoke us to move forward. There's a lot of conversation around, you know, how do you do it differently? And I think we're all imagining a protest as a group of people standing together, doing whatever, picketing. And I think, you know, when, be it we share things to sign, or we all rock up in some place, or we all share the same picture, or we all make our Instagram pictures black, like, for me, that is protest in one way or another, right? It's awareness creation, and it's about kind of putting pressure on the powers that be. But in the interest of connecting the future and looking deeper into this narrative, particularly around, what was your topic? Social protest, yeah?
The dynamics of social protest, for lack of a better, more concise way to put it.
so like, maybe just throwing back to you, how do you guide us into a space of thinking, you know, I think to a certain extent we all agree on, except Vincent, that in one way or another this influence agitates or makes change happen, but in our own spaces perhaps it's not necessarily always productive to be in a particular form or particular manner. So how do we not be silent? How do we show solidarity? How do we show up for each other? And how do we fundamentally, back to what we started with, have impact? And how do we measure that impact? So I'm throwing it back to you. You know, what would have, if you reflect on the paddlers going out, what would have been bigger than us across the globe having a conversation, seeing people doing something that otherwise we wouldn't have even opened a link for? I can tell you now, Wise, I speak on your behalf, I doubt you would have opened some random surf link on Zigzag. So yeah.
I think that Vincent's point about institutional change it's well taken. I also disagree. I don't think that that's the only space that we can wait for institutions to make moral decisions on their own, because the majority of the time I don't think that's where those decisions are coming from. And I think in a capitalist society, those decisions are largely motivated by money. In one way, shape, or form. So, I think the impetus of moral decisions has to come from people. It has to be provoked or agitated in some way. But I think, if I were to reflect on if I had been there in San Diego last weekend, I would have liked to see that group of people go engage directly with their police department. Go try to have a conversation, and not even in a protest, but go and try to engage directly with their local police department. That's where the source of this issue is coming out, and I kind of feel like those conversations, rather than just demonstrating in an otherwise, kind of safe and neutral public place, and I'm not negating the value of that connection and that demonstration of shared values, but yeah, I think wanting to clearly define at the outset what the impact should be. And so if the impact is to seek social justice and in the space of police brutality, then does it not make more sense to try to engage directly, peacefully, and with a dialogue with that particular institution where you want to see the change happen? And the only other actions that I have seen circulating and that I've participated in, again, back when Trump was elected, had to do with annoying the hell out of our local representatives, calling the local governor's office, calling the local congressman's office, flooding them with emails, but really trying to inundate those elected officials with individual opinions or collective opinions, and saying this is what needs to change, and being really, really direct about that. So I think it's still about communication, but it's about some level of organized communication and direct engagement, and trying to be as clear as possible about what the action should be or where the change should be. And it's easy for me to say it. I'm not in San Diego now, so I'm not able to do those things. And here in Portugal, I haven't yet explored what is the space for change to happen. And I'm in an interesting position here in Portugal too, just like I was in the 6 years I was in South Africa, where I was an immigrant. And so not understanding all of the nuances of governance and politics in a particular country, and only sort of being able to engage with it or experience it socially, and culturally, was something that I found a bit frustrating at times, and I'm finding it, I suppose, a bit frustrating here as well. It's a different space to be in, I think, to live in a place and observe the way that it functions, especially as a newcomer. But that's an entirely different topic. So that's what I would say, I guess, is can we engage directly with the institutions where we want to see change? Can we do it at least at a local or a regional or a state level, provincial level? Is there a space more accessible where we could agitate for that institutional change?
Yeah.
Okay. Skoni, would you like to say something?
Can you hear me?
Can hear you fine.
Oh, okay. No, my interest is in the outcome of all of this that happens. And it doesn't matter what form or shape of protesting or showing emotion or whatever. But I'm quite interested to see that after all the energies have been wasted, we picked up our steps and all, how do we know that there is an impact that is quantifiable or that is visible? For instance, we can, march and march and march, but if the laws are not changed and are not made public, that as of the marches 2 weeks ago, we have now made, or maybe they can gazette it to say, we've made the changes that if the police, in order to curb police brutality, for instance, we have now introduced a body camera, and this is how it's going to help the people and all of that. But oftentimes you find that we have, like somebody has commented, that we go all the way and leave our homes and march and gather in big numbers, and then we disappear and we're back to normal. And so it doesn't matter to me what form we take. It could be that when I'm sitting here at home, I am in a form of a strike, but I'm interested to see what the outcome will be from the powers that be, and they must make it public. And they mustn't say, oh no, we've changed the laws, but what does the new law mean now? How is it different to the previous one? Kind of a thing.
And, any protest that I've been a part of, honestly, I must tell you, there's always been a mandate. It's been clear why I wake up and put on a t-shirt and go. Like, I've never stood on the front lines just because I feel like singing a struggle song. So maybe it's how we do it in SA or in KZN or in my circles. But perhaps that speaks to, again, why you guys are feeling the way you're feeling, back to what I said initially around maybe your expectation is bigger than. I've just asked, I see we have 4 minutes here. I've just asked someone to join us. They have no idea what we're speaking about. Absolutely no clue. I'm going to sit her down. I'm going to give her a brief, and I'm going to ask her for 2 minutes to share her view in a convincing way.
Oh, no pressure.
No pressure. So
what's going on?
The conversation here is largely about
so short now.
is about social protest. Yes. And the question and conversation that's happening really is, is there a clear outcome? Are we just showing up for each other? Is solidarity enough? What is the impact? And there's a sense of we're doing all of this. How come this was bigger than they normally are?
The Black Lives Matter thing, or what?
Well, we're trying to move away specifically from Black Lives Matter to talk about connecting to the future. How do we move forward and make social protest in whatever form, for me, bigger than what it is? But what I'm gauging here is that there's a sense of we come, but we're not sure what happens afterwards. So 2 minutes to just Wena as a core frontline picketer.
Yes.
Why do you do that? What is the picket?
Right. Okay, well, that was an incredibly vague brief. So sorry, chaps, if I'm not completely clear, but my sense is what I'm being asked to talk about is what happens next. Like why we have these conversations over and over and over again. How do you take the next step? Is that right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
what we're arguing is that there does not seem to be a clear connection between the desirable outcomes and the protest actions and whatever that it is that happens during protest.
I think that's because you're expecting there to only be one answer, but social change is never just one answer. Social change isn't a destination, it's a journey, right? I know that sounds very cliched and glib, but the reality is that what is defines social? It's a society. A society is made up of individuals, of human beings interacting with each other. And so that change that you're talking about, whether it's Black Lives Matter or LGBTI rights or gender-based violence and ending patriarchy or all the other things, connect to each other, because at the end of the day, they're about changing how you think and how you interact with other people. So like I think where we get stuck a lot of the time is we get stuck only looking at the macro level of social change. And at the macro level, it's sometimes when you're looking at something that's so enormous, it becomes impossible to see the changes, because it's like tracking continental drift. It's this massive thing, and it's really hard to get an overview of how society shifts and changes. But if you look at things on the micro level, if you kind of zoom from this like massive zoom out to zooming in on how we talk to our family and friends, how we interact with our colleagues, how we vote, how we shop, like make it a more human scale. And that's where social change really happens. So if you're talking about the protests right now, thank you, honey, for my props. If we're talking about currently what's going on around Black Lives Matter, is everything in America going to shift really quickly, and is racism going to go away overnight? Absolutely not. But is it important that if you have a look at the children's books, the top selling children's books on the New York Times bestseller list, 9 of the 10 are dealing with how to talk to your children about race and racism? That's huge, because that's not just about the politics and the protesting and what's going on in the streets. It's also about, how do I take that and make it something that's part of my conversations with my children in the future? And so I don't know, guys, if that answers your question about like what's different now to in the future, but that's what I would say. I would say stop focusing on the macro and focus on the kind of more human scale, micro level of things. And I do believe this is important change. And on that bombshell. Back to you.
All right.
Sure. Was that what you wanted?
I just wanted to get a beer.
No. You cheat.
Oh, goodness.
It is 7:01. I don't know if we're still enjoying discourse or not. I confess I did want to get up for a beer and not leave you empty-handed. I see we're talking about EFF. Mbali, do you want to just put a word to that text? Then we'll give you a chance, and then Amy, I'm still waiting on you.
Okay, so I was saying that, you know, I have no issues. I mean, I supported Black Lives Matter as well. But what I don't get is a political party in South Africa going to the American embassy to go protest on this Black Lives Matter thing. But it's Americanized when we have 11 men that have been killed by law enforcement since COVID-19, and making no particular mention about it. So I felt like as a country, we like piggybacking on things and losing the plot. And for me, I was just like, what's up with Julius and his people, you know, when he could have just gone to Pretoria to our own, I don't know, what is it called there? Vincent, there in Pretoria.
Union
Hey?
Union buildings.
Yes, thanks. Union,
no.
and create a standoff or whatever it is there. Yes, still being Black Lives Matter, but South African. So they're kneeling for 9 minutes at the American embassy in Pretoria was just for me really ridiculous. But, you know, I don't know, maybe Trump hurt them. I don't know. So that's my gripe with that protest. I just felt that it was just very confused.
Sorry, Vincent, can I jump in quickly? So I 100% have heard a lot of these, especially on social media, where it's like, why are you jumping in now? Why are you not focusing back home on your xenophobic attacks that are happening on your own Black brothers? And I fully agree and take that on board. Is why haven't we been doing that? But that is the past right now, right? That those xenophobic attacks have happened. So if I am a protester or I'm a person who decides I'm going to start today I mean, admittedly, I've never done a protest until now. This is the first time I've joined one, but this is because now I feel like I have the voice, the courage to be part of a social movement that can make an effect change in some sort of way. But what I feel like is everyone bashing these people who just started to protest and saying, haha, in your history you didn't do this, is actually very, very bad in a sense of way. You're discouraging the people. Maybe, especially the EFF guys, they know if they stood up on their own in South Africa, nothing would change. I mean, I think you, Mbali, said nothing changes in SA if we do protest. Maybe now they're riding on a wave that says, we know this is going to be a paying march, and this is going to pay dividends, and we're going to seem like a people of power. Then going forward, all the marches that we do would look like something that actually affects power and change. Therefore, everyone will jump on our bandwagon and everything is going to work and we're going to do something good. So I'm not against anyone jumping in on any movement to say, okay, cool, now I'm jumping. As long as you're not jumping in with, I'm just chasing clout only. If you're going to start today because it's a movement that's lovely and everywhere in the world is picking up momentum, jump in, but don't stop there. Carry on, realize that this is bigger than just today. So that's all I would say is when you see people jump in, don't say, why didn't you do this on this day, whatever. Say, I'm glad you started joining. Please carry on. I will be there next to you to call you up on that. Remember, you went Black Lives Matter, but now you're not talking about femicides. You're not talking about this. You're not talking about. You are supposed to be a person who's a protester from now on because you've started to engage in something that is personal, and you know what I mean. I think was it Martin Luther King or someone said an injustice to one is an injustice to all. Kind of thing. We cannot all find justice if someone is being done an injustice. So treat it that way. If you're going to start protesting now, in the true essence of protesting the injustices that are happening, then be consistent going forward. I will not judge you for your past, but I will judge you for your future when you're actually committed to be a fighter of injustice.
I see the time. Stu, Amber, Londi, Vincent.
Okay, thanks, Jackie.
I thought you just wanted
ambush.
to listen today.
Eh?
I thought you just wanted to listen today.
I really wanted to just jump in and listen. I really did. And then my device let me down. I couldn't come in silently. So I agree with Martin to a certain extent, except for when he locates, the xenophobic sentiments within our country to the past, because they're very much present and current. Naledi Chira, EFF's woman spokesperson, MP rather, raised this issue of the hypocrisy within our South African Black society for siding with the Black Lives Matter, but then also spewing, in hectic and violent intolerance towards, our foreign visitors and foreign citizens within the country. So, and of course, at the same time, not only are we Afrophobic or xenophobic, but we're also misogynistic and homophobic. And these are just not even, along color lines, but within the Black struggle itself, there's this massive intolerance. And I know, to me, and I know someone said to me that, exactly, Vincent, isn't it, right? I said, I raised this question, I raised this hypocrisy, and I raised this inconsistency. And I said, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, which ones are we talking about? I think maybe we need to be honest about this. When we say Black Lives Matter, we should be clear that we don't mean all Black lives. We really mean Black, hetero, cis-normative Black men. Right? Not all Black lives. Not all Black lives, but just, Black men. That's who we really mean, right? Because everyone else, and those are the only lives who, when they are lost, sort of, raise this outrage and these worldwide movements. We've had women, Black women dying here at the hands of Black men in South Africa, for a long time, but it's never sparked this massive outrage, from anyone. And all of a sudden, George Floyd, a black man, dies in America, and even black men in South Africa can identify with that, and they're moved out of their comfort zones to participate in this struggle. So I ultimately, I think it's just the black men's lives that matter, and not necessarily black women, black trans, and members of the LGBTQI community, or black women. We always just incorporate these bodies and appropriate these bodies, and use them as shields in the struggle for. Guys, stop trolling me. We always use these. We always incorporate and enlist the assistance of black women, to help us fight our own battles as men. So I raised this with another group of like-minded guys, and they said to me, we need to focus on one thing, like political liberation and then economic liberation. Then we'll focus on these other ones. And I'm like, no. If you can be intolerant while oppressed, you yourself are intolerant while you yourself are oppressed, and you're intolerant while you don't have power, that comes with political control and economic control and economic access. If you can be intolerant, destructively so, without that access and without that power, what makes you think that we are going to trust you as black men, right? When you've got access to power and you've got resources, right? What makes us believe that you'll have our interest at heart when you couldn't accept us as part of as equal partners within your struggles? So for me, where protest comes in, I think there's also a need for us to be extremely clinical in also interrogating and critiquing our own protests and the hypocrisy hidden within there as well. Because shot.
Thank you, Stu. Amber, I've been dying to hear your voice.
Hi. A lot. That's good, because it should be a lot.
Would you like it there before you speak?
You got whiskey, yeah? I think the first thing is, irrespective of what people are doing, something is better than nothing is my instinct, right? Kind of as Charlene said, at least if you're doing something, then there's a conversation and there's a ripple and hopefully there's an effect there. So that, I guess, would be my first thing. But I don't know, it's the most complex thing. There's always, with anything like this, there is right and wrong and no right and no wrong. And like we said earlier, you do it quietly, it's not enough. You do it loudly, it's too much. Like, there's no, and I think we're only even scratching the surface in like an hour. And so I don't know, like, it's been a really good conversation for me. Like, certainly something that I don't even know where to begin. And I think that's the thing for a lot of people. And I think the best thing is that you just begin, you just do something. And even if you do the wrong thing, you learn, you move past it, and you do something that's better next time. I don't know, but thank you for the topic, because it has been, but in a good way.
Great, thanks. Londi, I know you're holding on there.
Hi everyone. So for me, it's just to answer the question, why don't things change anymore? Don't change after we protest, because I think Bali also spoke about protesting for her on her side, protesting for stuff such as gender violence. I think sometimes the problem is that the problem is not the laws. Yes, there are protests where you protest and laws change. For example, in the Fees Must Fall protest in South Africa. But sometimes when we protest, the thing we don't understand that there's nothing wrong with the laws. Racism is not legal. It's not legal in America. But the problem is psychology, values, and morals. Because the cry of the Black people in America is not change the law and make us equal. They are equal in law. But the problem for them is that
treat us as equals, value our lives as Black people, because I feel like the people in America feel like their lives don't matter as much as the other races. So for me, a lot of times the problem is not laws, although yes, we do need to protest against laws sometimes, but at the core of the problems that we are protesting for are just psychology, our values and morals, to say, what do we believe about other people? Because what we believe about other people, what we believe about our world and how our world should be, that determines how we behave, that determines how we treat other people.
Okay, kusemnandi here. Now we're enjoying ourselves, but it is 7:15. So I'm going to suggest we formally wrap it up. And, if you want to stick around, we can have a conversation, it's fine, ignore me. Okay, it's so nice for him to just be the chatterbox guy, like he's having the time of his life. Oh, Vincent, shame. Amy, thank you for the topic. Thank you for really just igniting this conversation. Social protest, for me, it's a political expression. It seeks to influence, to bring knowledge into a space that perhaps wasn't there, shift attitudes, shift behaviors. And sometimes that's small, sometimes that's massive. And depending on who's in the front, who's leading, who's organizing, the objectives are clear, sometimes they're not. And again, I don't think protest needs to always take the same form of us walking down the road, marching, chanting something. And where I'd hoped we'd get is kind of in a space of how do we talk about moving forward, interlinking all the conversations we've had in the past, the use of AI, gender, the conversation we had about norms and expectations, and stick that into a pot. Are we looking to a future where computers are just saying click here to protest, and really shifting our minds? But I see that the topic is close to home, which is why we ended up having more of a discussion around the nitty-gritty. And that's happened more and more in this space, Vince. Like I know I know you wanted us to connect the future in a more prescribed manner in terms of kind of looking forward, but in this instance, I think it's been necessary to reflect and spend some time introspecting and thinking about our own roles in society and how we influence the people around us and in what forms and to what extent. So thank you so much, Amy. Thank you everyone for joining. Vince, once you stop this recording, we can have a frank conversation about this chitter chatter happening here in the chat.
Please give me the instruction, and I'll do what you want me to do.
Okay. Is there anyone else who has a last comment? Amy, do you want to close us off, and then we can end record?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I just want to thank everybody for the kind of discussion that I was really hoping for, with a lot of different perspectives at the table. And I think for me personally, what I commented on in the chat, that the reminder that me being critical of people within my community who I might view as complacent and comfortable and sort of taking like a tiny baby step, towards connection and solidarity, that if I'm critical of it, I'm probably going to turn people off of it. And that what I should really be doing is supporting those people in my community in whatever sort of micro movement that they're making. And I appreciate that reminder. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Formal good night. Stay if you're staying, bye if you're going.